Hey, folks, welcome to today's episode of the Law of Self-Defense. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca for the Law of Self-Defense, and we're here today to talk about this weekend's shenanigans with NFL wide receiver Tyreek Hill and his traffic stop and how that went sideways. So let's settle in. We got quite a bit of video clips to look at, and of course, our general legal analysis, insight, education. It should be a great deal of fun. So what are we dealing with here? A driver speeds down a busy road and he's pulled over by police. Pretty common event. As police walk up to his vehicle, the driver's window, which had been open, the driver closes that window as the police walk up. And rather than simply complying with a routine traffic stop for speeding and being on his way in minutes, this driver decides to present a threatening demeanor to the officers. He commits an additional misdemeanor crime, punishable by up to a year in prison in the course of the traffic stop, and unsurprisingly finds himself removed from his vehicle and lawfully detained on the side of the road. And whose fault is all this? Apparently, the real issue is not the driver who made all these choices and his criminal and threatening conduct, but rather the entirely lawful conduct of the officers involved. Nope, I'm not kidding. The internet consensus is that the cops were the bad guys here. So let's discuss this. Now, before we jump into things, I do want to thank our sponsor, CCW Safe, a provider of legal service memberships, what many people mistakenly call self-defense insurance. In effect, CCW Safe promises to pay its members' legal expenses if the member is involved in a use of force event. And they do much, much more than that as well. Now, there are a number of companies out there that offer similar services. Some of them are worth considering. They're different flavors for different needs. Some of them are hot garbage I could never recommend under any circumstances. CCW Safe is the one I trust. I'm personally a member of CCW Safe. My wife, Emily, is personally a member. I believe in them, and I trust them to do what they say they're going to do when they say they'll back up their members. If you'd like to learn why I trust CCW Safe, you can point your browser to lawofselfdefense.com/trust. I have a very short video there where I explain in more detail why they are my choice. And at that same URL, lawofselfdefense.com/trust, you can find a 10% discount code for your own membership at CCW Safe when you become a member. And join me there. Again, that's at lawofselfdefense.com/trust. All right, so by now you've probably heard about the roadside detention of NFL wide receiver Tyreek Hill, who was pulled over for speeding as he drove his sports car to a game in which he would eventually play and score a touchdown for his Miami Dolphins team. Not that it should matter, but this is the world in which we live. Tyreek Hill happens to be a young black male and an adult, of course, and the officers involved, at least early in the stop, appear to have been Hispanic. The many video perspectives of this encounter have led to the now usual outcry against the police officers involved, an outcry that's really simply insane on its face. One person in this encounter engaged in unlawful and criminal activity, and that was Tyreek Hill, repeatedly. The officers acted entirely within their lawful authority, violating no laws. Yet the internet consensus is supposed to be that it was the officers who were the bad guys and Tyreek Hill was an innocent victim of their misconduct. Now, although I've reviewed all the available video of this encounter, and I will put the full length of the body-worn camera in the description for those of you who'd like to see the whole 25 minute long body-worn camera video, I'm going to focus here on the just under 3 minutes of that video that captures the essential details for us to have a legal understanding of what went down here. And I'll highlight portions of the video in a bit. But first, let's do a run through from beginning to end of this roughly 3-minute clip. So this roughly 3-minute clip starts with a motorcycle officer stopping Hill on the side of the road, with the officer communicating to Hill through Hill's open driver's side window that he's been stopped for speeding. And that video concludes 2 minutes and roughly 45 seconds later with Hill detained in handcuffs and seated on the curb. So with that overview, let's go ahead and watch this video clip, and I'll shrink myself down for this purpose. Here we go.
How's there speeding? I'm asking my door. Move forward. Yeah, we got it here.
Notice the window's open here. I put a couple freeze frames in. Now the window's closing. Now the window's fully closed. Knocks on the window.
Why don't you have your seatbelt on? Don't knock on my window. Why don't you have your seatbelt on? Don't knock on my window like that, though. Like what? Don't knock on my window like that. Why you have it up? Don't knock on my window like that. Why you have it up? I have to knock to let you know I'm here. That way you can lower it and talk to you. Just get my ticket, bro, so I can go. I'm gonna be late, gang. Do what you gotta do. Keep it down. Hey. Keep your window down. What? Danny. Hey. Keep your window down. Keep your window down. I'm gonna get you out of the car. As a matter of fact, get out of the car. Give me that. Get out of the car. Give me that. I'm gonna break that window. Get out of the car. Get out of the car right now. We're not playing this game. Get out. 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 Damn. What part of brother doing this time? Hey, Drew. Hey, Drew. I'm getting arrested, Drew. I'm getting arrested. I'm getting arrested, Drew. I'm getting out, bro. God damn, twin. When we tell you to do something, you do it. You understand? You understand? Not what you want, but what we tell you. You're a little fucking confused. I'm getting out, bro. Too late. Too late. All right, bro. Take me to jail, bro. Do what you got to do, bro. We are. We will. Good, bro. It is good. Hey. Don't worry about it. I hung up the phone. Stop crying. Bro. All right. You know my woman like you crazy. You know my woman like y'all crazy. No. You know my window like he's crazy. I ain't do nothing, twin. Hey, hold on, pull to the side, yo, dude. Hey. Hold on, bro. I just had surgery on my knee. bro. I just had surgery on my knee, bro. I just surgery in your ears when we chill, bro.
Okay, so that's the full length of the video that I want to share with all of you today. And now we'll step through it bit by bit. So before we break the video down, let's consider some of the legal realities applicable to this encounter, really applicable to any traffic stop encounter. First, the police have the legal authority to pull over drivers for traffic violations. Does that even need to be said? A traffic violation, like, for example, for driving 60 miles per hour in a 45 mile per hour zone, which is the citation for which Tyreek Hill was written up. Note, the citation is not for 100 plus miles per hour. There are lots of reports of that kind of speed, but he was actually cited for 60 in what I believe was a 45 zone. Now, that's still 30% above the posted speed limit, and nobody driving 60 in a 45 should be surprised if they get pulled over for a speeding ticket. Second, the police have the legal authority during a traffic stop to give reasonable commands intended to ensure safety and to compel compliance with those demands. For example, that a driver not obscure observations of his hands during a traffic stop. That's an obvious safety risk. Third, failure to comply with lawful orders privileges the officers involved to use such physical force as reasonably necessary to compel compliance with the lawful orders. For example, to remove the driver from the vehicle, to detain and secure a driver in a manner consistent with the safety of the driver and the officers involved. Police are allowed to do that. Fourth, failure to comply with lawful orders from officers is an independent crime under Florida law. Statute section 843.02 resisting officer without violence. It's an arrestable misdemeanor offense punishable by up to a year in jail. Now, with all those legal realities on the table, let's break down the video in detail. So we'll start at the beginning. The first clip we'll see the motorcycle officer begin to pull Hill over. And in response to Hill's inquiry, apparently, he'll inform Hill that the reason for the stop is that Hill was speeding. And again, he'll eventually be cited for doing 60 in a 45. Note that during this exchange, the vehicles are still in motion. The car's moving, the motorcycle's moving, the car windows open, and the motorcycle officer and Hill are having this exchange. So let's take a look at that, just that first clip now.
Officer speeding. Move forward.
Okay, so we have the stop. And so far, the only person to have committed an unlawful act is Tyreek Hill, the speeding. Indeed, the officer was under no obligation to inform Hill of the reason for the stop when he tells Hill, you're speeding at this point, because at this point in the encounter, the vehicles are still in motion. Hill's required to pull over regardless of whether he's given a reason beforehand. That's his legal obligation. But the officer chooses to inform Hill anyway, even while they're still rolling, that the reason for the stop is speeding. Second, the motorcycle officer gets off his bike, for some reason off the right-hand side. I guess that's a motorcycle cop thing, and approaches Hill's driver's side window. Now, the next obvious step is that the officer would ask Hill for his license and other related documentation, such as registration and insurance. And note that Tyreek Hill is legally obligated to present these documents to the officer. It's not an option. And despite this obvious next step of presenting these documents and the legal obligation to do so, as the officer approaches Hill's vehicle, what does Hill do? He takes the window beside him that was just open, and he raises and closes that driver's side window as the officer approaches. Now, in this next clip, I've inserted freeze frame so we can see the progress of the window, first open, then partially closed, then fully closed. So with that said, let's jump into this second video clip. In this second clip, the motorcycle officer gets off his bike and approaches Hill's driver's side window, the window that was just open a moment before when they had this exchange about the reason for the stop. The next obvious step in this interaction is that the officer would ask Hill to present his license and other related documentation, such as his registration and insurance. And I would note that Hill is legally obligated to present these documents to the officer. It's non-optional when you're pulled over operating a motor vehicle in a public way. Despite this obvious next step and the legal obligation to present these documents, as the officer approaches Hill's vehicle, Hill raises and closes his driver's side window. Now, in this clip, I've added some freeze frames so we can better see the progress of the window from open to closed as the officer walks up.
Yeah, we got it here.
You can see there the window's still open.
6 o'clock.
Officer gets off the bike. Oddly, on the right-hand side, that must be a police thing. As he's walking up, you can see the window's halfway up now. And now the window is completely closed, just in time for the officer to get there. This uncooperative closing of the window might well have been a clue to a reasonable officer to anticipate possible non-compliance from this driver. In the third clip, we hear the officer knock rather gently on the driver's side window, in response to which the officer receives a rather hostile response from Hill. Hill says, "Don't knock on my window like that," and he repeats it 7 full times. While this is certainly not a crime on the part of Hill, if he wants to speak repetitively, I guess he can. And while Hill's under no obligation to answer any questions from the officer, it might be another clue suggesting that Tyreek Hill may intend to be affirmatively hostile and non-compliant during this traffic stop. So let's take a look at our third clip. Pay particular attention to the manner in which the officer knocks on the window. Tyreek Hill is going to try to suggest that the officer seemed to be about to smash the window in. This was a pretty polite knock.
Hey, don't knock on my window like that, man.
Why don't you have your seatbelt on?
Don't knock on my window.
Why don't you have your seatbelt on?
Don't knock on my window like that, though.
Like what?
Don't knock on my window like that.
Why you have it up?
Don't knock on my window like that.
Why you have it up? I have to knock to let you know I'm here. That way you can lower it and talk to you.
Just get my ticket, bro, so I can go.
All right, I'm going to start it at the beginning, just the first couple seconds. Immediately, you'll hear the knock. Tell me if this knock sounds to you as particularly hostile or aggressive. What I hear is tap, tap. Don't knock on my window like that. Don't knock on my window like that. Don't knock on my window like that. Just repeat that 7 times. Now, immediately after this exchange, while the officer is still standing beside the window, and he now once again raises and closes the window. So he had opened it up a crack to talk to the officer. Now he's closing it again. The officer gives Hill the lawful order to keep the window down. Now, why is this closing of the window relevant? Why does the officer care? Because the heavily tinted glass prevents the officer from observing Hill's hands inside the vehicle. It's no different than if Hill were otherwise holding his hands out of sight. The officer's legally authorized for purposes of safety to order the driver to keep his hands visible and open to observation. And the driver is legally required to comply with that lawful order. Importantly, merely cracking the window open slightly fails to satisfy the safety necessity of allowing ready observation of the interior of this vehicle. Now, if the window were not heavily tinted and ready observation of the interior of the vehicle were possible, even with the window closed or slightly cracked, this would obviously be much less of a safety concern. But in this case, the window was heavily tinted. You couldn't really see through the glass into the interior of the vehicle with the window obstructing that view, hence the safety concern. Now, in this instance, the officer is legally authorized for purposes of safety to order Hill to keep his window, his heavily tinted window, down during the stop so the officer can observe his hands. And Hill is legally required to comply with that lawful order. It's not optional. Instead, Hill refuses to comply with the order to open the window, to lower the window, despite the order being repeated several times. And the officer knocking again on the window in what I would characterize as a perfectly reasonable knock, with Hill ultimately only slightly opening the window, and as we've said, thus still falling short of allowing ready observation of the interior of the vehicle. Now, this refusal on the part of Hill is a criminal offense, independent of his speeding, and as it happens, also a seatbelt traffic infraction. Florida law refers to this kind of non-compliance with lawful orders as resisting an officer without violence, and it is a crime under Florida law. It is a misdemeanor offense, punishable by up to a year in jail under statute 843.02, which reads in relevant part, as we can see here, whoever shall resist, obstruct, or oppose any officer in the execution of legal process or in the lawful execution of any legal duty without offering or doing violence to the person of the officer shall be guilty of a misdemeanor of the first degree, and a first degree misdemeanor under Florida law is typically punishable by up to a year in jail. So Hill's just gotten himself another offense, this time a criminal misdemeanor offense, if the police want to charge him with that. Ultimately, they don't, but that's clearly what's happening here, a violation of 843.02, resisting officer without violence. So that's precisely what Hill is doing by refusing to comply with the officer's lawful orders given for the purpose of ensuring safety, to wit, to allow ready observation of the interior of the vehicle in the course of a lawful traffic stop. And note that during this exchange, at one point, Hill tells the officer, "Don't tell me what to do," at the very end there. Of course, the officer can't simply give Hill any order he likes. He can't tell Hill, "I order you to give me an autograph," for example. That would not be a lawful order consistent with the officer carrying out his lawful duties. But the officer is explicitly authorized by law to give Hill lawful orders that are consistent with the officer carrying out his duties. And Hill is legally obliged to comply with those lawful orders. It's not optional. The "don't tell me what to do" in response to exactly such a lawful order to lower the window is yet another indication to the officer that Hill intends to be non-compliant. Here's the next segment of the video clip.
It's gonna be late, gang. Do what you gotta do.
Keep it down. Hey, keep your window down. Hey, keep your window down.
Don't tell me what.
Keep your window down. I'm gonna get you out of the car.
Don't tell me what to do. In fact, the officer can lawfully tell Hill what to do if it's a lawful order consistent with the officer carrying out his duties, and Hill is legally obliged to comply with that order. It is non-optional. So at this point, the officer's just threatened to take him out of the car, but the officer decides he's had enough, and he just says, "Get out of the car." He's pulling him out due to his non-compliance. And given Hill's continued non-compliance with lawful orders, violation of the misdemeanor offense of resisting an officer under statute 843.02, and so the officer orders Hill out of his car, lawfully orders him out of the car. This order is again consistent with the officer's authority and arguably his legal duty to ensure safety in the course of the traffic stop. Further, the only reason the removal from the vehicle has been made necessary is because of Hill's ongoing non-compliance throughout the traffic stop so far. Now, the order to get out of the car being a lawful order, it is the legal obligation of Hill to comply with that lawful order. It is non-optional. And it is within the authority of the officers to use reasonable and necessary force to compel such compliance. Now, had it been necessary to compel compliance with this order, that the officers had to break the car window, they would have been legally privileged to break the car window to gain access to Hill. And one officer, you can hear them in the background, does threaten to do exactly that if Hill refuses to comply with the order to exit the vehicle. As it happens, breaking the glass proves unnecessary. Though if it had been necessary, it would have been lawful. And so the window's not, in fact, broken. But again, Hill remains non-compliant with the lawful order to exit the vehicle, despite the officer repeating the order multiple times. Finally, the officers manage to open the door, and they forcibly remove Hill from the vehicle. Again, this is a lawful use of force by these officers to compel Hill's compliance with their lawful order to exit the vehicle. At that point, they put Hill into a prone handcuffing position on the ground and handcuff him. At this point, Hill has been lawfully detained, not arrested, as Hill mistakenly calls into his phone, but lawfully detained. And handcuffing during a lawful detention is not only permissible, but arguably required in order to ensure safety for all involved, especially when the person being detained has consistently indicated their intention to be non-compliant in the course of an otherwise routine traffic stop. At one point, one of the officers tells Hill, "When we tell you to do something, you do it." In the context of the lawful orders these officers have been giving to Hill, this is simply a correct statement of the law. Also, now when compliance is being compelled, Hill protests that he was about to comply, and the officer informs Hill that it's too late for voluntary compliance. This is also a correct statement of the law. When a lawful order is given, the recipient is legally obliged to comply with that order immediately, not merely at a time of their own choosing and convenience. Let's watch the next video clip.
As a matter of fact, get out of the car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car right now. We're not playing this game. Get out. 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 Damn. What part of brother doing this time? Hey, Drew, I'm getting arrested, dude. I'm getting arrested. I'm getting arrested, Drew. I'm getting out, bro. God damn, twin. When we tell you to do something, you do it. You understand? You understand? Not what you want, but when we tell you. You're a little fucking confused. I'm getting out, bro. Too late. Too late.
So Hill's then lifted up under his arms. He's walked over to the sidewalk and he's asked to sit on the curb. Now, the reason he's asked to sit on the curb is, again, for purposes of safety. Persons detained sometimes try to flee, which can endanger both themselves and the officers, especially when everyone's close to vehicular traffic, like here. Sometimes people run into the road, get hit by a car. A detained person is now, their safety is the responsibility of the officers detaining them. So it's very common to put a detained person in a seated position on the curb to make them, less able to engage in that kind of dangerous flight. And yet again, of course, Tyreek Hill refuses to comply with the lawful order to sit on the curb. So the officers are again obliged to resort to reasonable and necessary force to compel compliance and sit him on the curb. Now, kind of laughably, at this point, Hill suddenly decides that he's unable to take a seated position because he says, "I've just had surgery on my knee." The fact that he was moments ago in a seated position in his sports car and that he would leave this traffic stop to play as a wide receiver in an NFL game and score a touchdown in the course of that game would suggest that these cries about a debilitating knee condition that could be aggravated simply by sitting down were simply nothing more than a fabrication. Let's watch the last of the little video clips.
All right, bro, take me to jail, bro. Do what you gotta do, bro.
We will.
Good, bro.
It is good.
Hey.
Don't worry about it. I hung up the phone. Stop crying.
Bro.
Stop crying.
I ain't do nothing, twin.
He smacked in my window like he's crazy. Did he? No, did he? He's resisting the sitting there.
I just had surgery on my knee. I just had surgery on my knee, bro. Chill, bro.
So he just had surgery on his knee. He can't sit down, but they're going to compel him to sit down. And then after this, he's going to play in an NFL game and score a touchdown. Okay. So at this point in the interaction, and this is really where all the action takes place, what do we have? What do we have here? What conclusions can we draw, legally and otherwise? Now, before we jump into that, I do want to remind everybody, don't forget that you can always pick up, no, not always, but for the time being, you can pick up a free copy of our best-selling book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles. It's your handbook to being hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, or your property. Check it out on Amazon. It's 5-star rated, bestseller in its category. But don't buy it on Amazon. They'll charge you for the book. I think it's $20 or $25 plus shipping and handling. We only ask you to cover the cost of shipping the book to you. The cost of the book itself from us is free. And you can get your free copy of The Law of Self-Defense Principles at lawofselfdefense.com/free book. Simple enough. lawofselfdefense.com/free book. All right. So where are we at here? On the part of Hill, in terms of his conduct, we have a claimed speeding violation, a claimed seatbelt violation, and an unclaimed, uncharged, but pretty apparent misdemeanor criminal violation of resisting an officer without violence under Statute 843.02, all within the context of continual noncompliance with lawful orders from the officers involved. And what misconduct was committed by the officers? Literally none. None. Now, sure, some might argue that the officers could have made different, more passive, softer decisions in interacting with Hill. Maybe, but that's not required of them. And not having done so is not any form of misconduct on their part. Now, no police use of force tends to look pretty, and I can certainly understand why people watch this encounter and don't see it as pretty either. But that's really a very feminine sort of criticism, right? It's not what you said. In this case, it's not what they did. It's how you said it. It's how they did it. The fact that a police use of force makes someone uncomfortable doesn't make it unlawful. The bottom line here is that all of this could have been avoided had Tyreek Hill simply done what the law requires any and all drivers to do when stopped for a claimed traffic infraction. Present the documentation he's legally required to present and accept the ticket for the claimed offenses, which he can either pay or contest later. Had Hill done that, he'd have been on his way promptly, as are the many of thousands upon thousands of people stopped for similar traffic infractions every day in the United States. There's only one reason this particular traffic stop went sideways, and that reason is Tyreek Hill. So for people asking, oh my gosh, how would this have turned out had the driver not been Tyreek Hill? In an apparent attempt to suggest that surely these officers would have murdered a less famous person stopped for speeding. Well, my response is pretty straightforward. What if this driver had not been Tyrell Hill? Okay. What if Tyreek Hill was not driving 60 in a 45? What if Tyreek Hill hadn't decided to hide from police observation behind his heavily tinted car window, despite police ordering him to keep his window down for purposes of safety? What if Tyreek Hill had simply complied with lawful orders during a traffic stop, like thousands of other people that same day who were not dragged from their cars? What if? I guess we'll never know, because Tyreek Hill chose noncompliance. And that choice is entirely on Tyreek Hill. Remarkably enough, I would suggest the officers involved here actually gave Hill a pretty huge break. They merely cited him for the speeding and the seatbelt infractions. They gave him a ticket that he can either readily pay or he can contest it in court if he wishes. And they sent him on his way in time for his game and everything. They could instead have arrested Hill for his violation of misdemeanor offense resisting an officer under statute 843.02, in which case he would have almost certainly missed the game that day. I mean, the average NFL career for a wide receiver like Hill is reportedly less than 3 years. An elite wide receiver may score maybe 10 touchdowns a year. That works out to what, maybe 25 or 30 touchdowns over an entire career. And Tyreek Hill could legitimately have been arrested for a misdemeanor offense minutes before the game, missed the game, and therefore missed out on the touchdown he ultimately scored in that game. And that doesn't strike me as excellent judgment on his part. But nevertheless, here we are. Of course, we live in a time when many people have a hysterically neurotic hatred of police officers as a class. And for those people, any contentious interaction between police and the public must, of course, have been the result of police misconduct. It can never, ever have been the fault of the law-breaking people who are the reason that society hires and empowers police officers to interact with those people. And naturally, anyone who points out instances where the cops did it right, and it was the person with whom the cops were dealing who did it wrong, well, anyone pointing that out surely must be a bootlicker. I've been getting a lot of bootlicker remarks. These same people demonizing police generally, well, what does that attitude get us? Just greater demonization of the police, demonetization of the police, more prosecutions of police, experienced police officers driven from the profession and replaced by far less capable officers. I mean, what could go wrong? And then they wonder why some police interactions do go badly sideways. Why their communities can't seem to hire and retain competent police officers. Why the police stop responding to a wide variety of calls for service, including calls involving acts of violence. I'm looking at you, YouTube channel, the so-called civil rights lawyer. I'm sure many others as well. And Lord knows what Washington gun law thinks about all this. Perhaps this is yet another. Is this another execution of a black man for merely exercising his constitutional rights, according to attorney William Kirk? I guess we'll have to see what he has to say about it. In any case, everybody, enjoy the inevitable societal collapse that's coming. It's sure to be spicy. All right, folks, with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Just remind all of you that if you carry a gun, so you're hard to kill, you carry a knife, you carry pepper spray, you study jiu-jitsu. I do all those things, so I'm hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill. And you also owe it to yourself and your family to make sure you know the law, so you're hard to convict as well. Until next time, I remain attorney Andrew Branca for the Law of Self-Defense. Stay safe.